Welcome everybody to this morning's webinar. We're going to have a quick overview of EDI in general, but the general focus of today's webinar is to focus on how EDI is used within the Irish retail sector. We'll try to give some direct examples of that. Apologies, just not letting me change on to the next slide. Okay, so just to start off with some introductions, my name is Keith Gallagher. I'm the sales manager here in Ireland for TrueCommerce. For those unfamiliar with TrueCommerce, TrueCommerce is an EDI business. You may have came across us in our previous guys, which in Ireland would have been Atlas Products Ireland. We've been in Ireland for just around 10 years at this stage. We were acquired by a US business in TrueCommerce going back 3 years ago. As part of that acquisition, we did come together with a few other EDI businesses, particularly in Europe. So in the UK, we have 2 offices. We have our office here in Dublin, and we also have an office over in Copenhagen. Them 4 offices have came together under the guise of TrueCommerce Europe. We also have TrueCommerce US. As a business, we have $65 million revenues. We have around about 10,000 customers, and that leads to 130,000 trading relationships worldwide. So a really big EDI business. We have a bit of experience of everything, but a really strong focus on retail here in Ireland. I'll just pass you across to my colleague Brendan Kiernan, just to introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Brendan Kiernan. I've been with GS1 Ireland for the past 25 years with responsibility for specifically EDI Standards. GS1 Ireland was formerly A&AI Ireland and EAN Ireland, and we are responsible for assigning identifiers for the purposes of identification of products for barcoding and identification of parties involved in the EDI transaction messages. We manage the standards over the last 25 years, and we have issued various versions of the standards, and at the moment we could regard the market as fairly stable in the standards world. Back to you, Keith.
Apologies, I just skipped over one there. So this is actually you, Brendan. It's just to give an overview of the relationship between GS1 and TrueCommerce and how we happen to be in partnership on this.
Yeah. GS1 Ireland has run a program of engagement with companies who provide services based on using the GS1 standards. This partnership is a gold partnership that has been reviewed by GS1 and has looked at the commitment that TrueCommerce has offered to the development of EDI in the marketplace, and we're happy that this agreement demonstrates the TrueCommerce commitment to implementing the standards faithfully.
Perfect. Okay, so just to have an overview of the agenda and what we're going to cover today. So we're going to have a quick look at what is EDI, and actually in the side panel, for those that missed it, we have done an overview of EDI in general, and you may be interested in downloading that file and having a look over it at some stage. But we'll give a recap as to what EDI is and how it functions. We're going to look and have a core focus around the big 4 Irish retailers. That's not to say we haven't got interest in every retail sector within Ireland and indeed EDI in general in Ireland, but just to keep things simple, we're going to look at the big 4 because we'll show how the standards tend to carry across them. We're going to look at the actual EDI standards. Brendan has some great insight into this, so he'll be able to give us some detail. So when these retailers ask us specific questions around EDI, syntaxes and the likes, what do they mean by that and what's contained in it? So Brendan will be able to give us some detail on that. We're going to look at the EDI Managed Service, which is our service offering as a provider, and we're going to look at the efficiencies you can gain by using it over versus maybe a web portal. Also going to look at GLNs. For anyone that's came across the retail EDI in particular before, you might have came across this as an acronym before, but we're going to look at it, why a GLN is important, and also the barcodes within EDI and how they're used. Okay, so what is EDI? I guess for anybody new to it, maybe querying why they're being asked to do this when they're setting up relationships with these big retailers. From a retailer's perspective, they, I guess, are getting thousands and thousands of invoices per day. For them, it's a way to simplify things so that their business messages are coming through in exactly the same format and can be pulled directly into their system. So from a retailer side, you might be using Oracle, SAP, any of these big ERPs, and it's in your interest to get the messages through in a single format. So regardless if a supplier is quite small and using a web portal, or if they're a large supplier and they're using EDI, from the perspective of the retailer, they're getting all messages in exactly the same format. One other benefit of getting it in through via EDI is that we can have end-to-end reassurance that the message has made it, and also that we can validate it along the way. So most retailers will run a check and validation on the EDI message as it comes in to show that it's syntax correct, and also that the detail inside is correct and as they would expect it. And it just allows them to have a control point at the front door on any messages coming into the business. A lot of them will have outbound messages as well, so the likes of orders will be sent out, and they can be sure that the order has been sent out and received on the other side by you, the supplier. So the big four, as we mentioned, we're going to look and focus on these guys just because they have the volume within the marketplace. There are some smaller businesses that sit beneath these, but they tend to follow the same path as these guys. So if we look at the four here, each and every one of these has two pathways in terms of electronic messages. They have a web portal, so predominantly used by smaller users or guys that are specifically trading with them. And they also have traditional EDI. We're going to go through in a moment and look at the messages used by each and every one of them, and just give a little bit of detail as to what they tend to request of you when you start engaging with them. So messages, if we look at retail EDI, what are our core messages? And we've outlined four in effect here. By far the most important are your PO and your invoice, which would be a response mechanism. So they would issue the purchase order to you as the supplier, and the response message to that is the invoice to say that these are the goods I've shipped, and here's my invoice for them. Very standard business messages. Outside of that, the big four, we can see the ASN or DAN as we sometimes come across it, and what that acronym tends to stand for is an advanced shipping notice or a dispatch advice notice. Very similar message, slight difference between the two of them. So ASN, we can see with Tesco in Ireland, will tend to use it for their warehouse. So from their perspective, they want to be able to see that your goods are coming in at a set time, on a set date, what's going to be fulfilled out of the original order, and they like to have that information in advance. And that's the purpose of an advanced shipping notice, to be honest, is so that you know that of your order, so much is going to be fulfilled, be it in full or be it in part. The DAN is mentioned here because Dunnes Stores brought this in recently. Very similar message to the ASN, slight distinctions on it, and they use it for direct to store. May or may not be a requirement, but it's just something to be aware of when it comes to being asked of you. Credit notes, naturally, is just another standard business message that tends to be used by the big four. Requested information, when you initially set up, you will tend to be asked for a GLN or ANA code. I mention ANA code because Tesco will quite often refer to it as an ANA code. The distinction between the two is that GLN is very much how we would look at it in Europe. It's a global location number, and the ANA is a variant on that and tends to be used more as an acronym over in the UK. So Tesco tend to use that. But all it reverts back to is, and I know Brendan will go into it in greater detail, is it's a specific identifier for you as a business, and we use it within the EDI message then to identify your mailbox, which is why they're asking in this instance. The TUN, very similar purpose. It's more of an old-fashioned thing at this stage, but Tesco still tend to use the TradeNet user number because they are part of GXS, and TradeNet would be close to GXS's heart. So they may ask for a TUN. Again, both of these things you can liaise with your EDI partner on this, and they'll help you out. And in the case of the GLN, GS1 are the body responsible for holding these numbers, so you can acquire one directly from GS1. Okay, so just to look at the EDI standards, I'll just pass across to Brendan for this.
Yeah, the main EDI standards that have been in use for the last 30 years has been EDIFACT, and within that a variation of EDIFACT called EANCOM. And EANCOM is basically EDIFACT with GS1 standards embedded in it, and the GS1 standards being the identifiers. Now it's a global standard. It is used not just in Ireland, it's used in the UK, it's used France, Germany, other parts of the world, and it's the main predominant standard in use today in the retail trade area. TradeComms is an older standard. Again, it was a national UK standard, and it's still in use. If it's been in use for again over 30 years, and it's not broke, so we tend not to fix it. One of the disadvantages with TradeComms is that it doesn't cater for currency, so obviously it's only really relevant in a single currency area, such as where sterling is used, but it wouldn't be used for international trade at all. There are some other standards floating around, so you will hear ANSI X12, which is used in the United States, and you'll also hear the word XML standards. They're the new ones coming on stream, which are more web-based type standards and more suitable for internet type trading, but they're not used at this present time within the retail environment within Ireland.
Perfect, thanks Brandon.
This is an example. This is the business model that we are using in Ireland. This has evolved over the years. We would have liked to have said we sat down and started it like this day one, but it didn't happen like that. We actually started off all those years ago with the invoice and the credit notes, and the rest of the messages were added on. But if you look at the overall model now, we would define it as an order to cash model. And in other words, you place an order and ultimately you get payment for it through the banking system. The purchase order is sent by the sender to the recipient, to the retailer, to the supplier. Some suppliers will generate dispatch advice, which is foretelling what the shipment will be, or an ASN number, or ASN, what foretells what the shipment is going to be. Sometimes you might have a receiving advice or a proof of delivery. The message does exist, but it's not fully implemented yet by some organizations, and there are different philosophies on how a receiving advice or proof of delivery is sent back. Ultimately, that leads to the invoice being sent, and if the invoice is okay, it's passed for payment. If there's not, there may be a credit note issued afterwards to correct an incorrect delivery or damaged goods or whatever. So that is what we defined as the overall order to cash model. Within that, though, we have some of the subtleties of the GS1 system being used. The first is the GTIN to identify the product. I'm sure you can imagine that the processing free text descriptions of products to automatically match what has been delivered to what has been ordered is a very difficult thing to do. So that's why we use the GTIN, which is the identifier for the traded unit, whether it be the individual unit or the case. The next identifier we use is the GLN. There are various parties involved in the EDI transaction. It could be the person who places the order, it could be the person who receives the order, it could be the person in the warehouse that ships the order, which might be different from the person who receives the order. There could be the trading relationship, which is the person to receive the invoice or the person to send the invoice. All these parties involved in the transaction are identified by a GLN. We also, within the dispatch advice, use a serial shipping container code, the SSEC, which is used to identify the actual pallet that contains the goods. So you have a layered identification, so you could scan the SSEC out, the identification of the shipment pallet, and scan it at the back door and use that to verify at a top level what has been received, and the details of what's been received are contained within the dispatch advice. So that model is the type of model that's been formed out there. Not everybody's using it, but if you take a bird's eye view of it, that is what is actually implemented, and you as suppliers will be looking at that if you're trading with all of the retailers. Okay, back to you, Keith.
Okay, now we're just going to have a look at the EDI Managed Service, which, as I mentioned, is what our service offering as TrueCommerce is. And we'll just go into a bit of detail as to what's contained within the Managed Service. So I mentioned previously that the 4 big retailers tend to have a web portal. In the case of 3 of those, we are their direct EDI provider. So we provide the portals for Dunnes Stores, for Musgrave, and for BWG. So all of them would have a similar flavor, and they're all based on the same fundamental platform, and they all have slight distinctions on it because they are built around those businesses and what they require in terms of the message on it. Alongside that, we also offer traditional EDI, as it'll often be referred to, and in our case, it's an EDI managed service. So we're just going to have a look, an overview as to what the distinctions are between the two, just so you're aware that there are options out there as to what you do. So with EDI, it's specific to the retailer with Web EDI. So like that, when you log onto the Dunnes Stores portal, you can absolutely exchange messages as required with that retailer. If you then start to trade with Tesco, they can't naturally be added to the same platform on it. The platform is owned by the retailer themselves. So it is a convenient way of getting up. It's very quick to get set up with them, but it does have limitations in that sense. It is focused on low frequency, so they tend to use it for the smaller suppliers as a result. There are some large suppliers that tend to use it, particularly if they've got a long lead time between setting up their own EDI. They will jump on and use it. There are manual entry, which is the predominant use of it, but there is also an option to upload a CSV. So some of the larger businesses do produce a CSV file and upload it over the portal. There are cost models built around these web portals, and they will be specific to the retailers. We do tend to work with them on that and try to come up with something that is quite equitable, but at the end of the day, they are owned by the retailer, so they do have full control over the costs on it. Tends to be that the retailers will do these around the value of transactions that are sent over the web portal. So if you are a smaller guy and you're just entering in for the first time, they tend to do a lower cost point as a result. If you're a large known supplier to them, they will do a higher cost and associated, but it's worth checking in with the retailers on this sense. There is no software required, so it's all carried out in web browsers. Obvious reasons why, so they want it so that it's as easy as possible for anyone to connect to. So it's a case of just putting in the URL for whatever retail business it may be, and you can then enter in your business transactions on that platform. When we look at integrated EDI, it's a little bit different. So it's very much a generic EDI platform. So our perspective would be that you can add any single EDI relationship you want onto it, even down to the idea that you can add on supplier and customer facing onto the same platform. But the overall thing is that, yeah, if you have an EDI relationship, you can add it to that system. It is open to doing any relationship onto it. The big distinction then, I guess, that we'd get away from in terms of Web EDI is that it does connect directly to your ERP or to your accounts package. So we have direct integration for vast majority of platforms out there, and I've yet to come across a platform that we haven't been able to connect to in some way. And what that brings about is a lack of retyping and rekeying, which is of course where most errors come up in terms of EDI. So if we're getting to a a point whereby we're entering it first into our stage system and then into an EDI system, we will find that keystroke errors will occur and there will be rejections and failures as a result, because there's incorrect detail on the invoice, and when the retailer receives it in, they will fail it then as a result. It is web-based as well, so we have moved with the times on this. Used to be predominantly software-based, and it would need an application on your system to use it, but we've moved now to a stage where we're starting to use more and more web-based tools and just making it more accessible to everybody. There's much better disaster recovery then as a result, so if your system falls over, you can still access it from another PC. The big key advantage of it is you've got one service provider for all your EDI needs, so that as you're asked the question, can you supply EDI with us, you can 100% answer yes, we can, and then it's a case of just handing it over to us as your provider. Just to give I guess a bird's eye view as to how it works in reality. So here's the diagram we use. It's very much a generic diagram, not specific to retail in Ireland, but just to give it a flavour as to how it sits. So your accounts package or your ERP sits on your side in your systems. We have a connector into our platform, which is called OneTime. OneTime is the managed service, and it's hosted in the cloud. So that connector will be of your choosing, but typically an AS2 or an FTP connection that comes into us. And then on the other side of things, we'll connect into your customer. So be it Tesco, be it Dunn's, be it BWG, it doesn't matter. You can add as many or as few as you want onto this, and it will all channel through our OneTime system in, and then back onto your ERP. But it just gives it a flavour as to just how simple it is, and how, I guess, agnostic we are to who the supplier is, what formats they're using, and how they want to connect, because we will find that there are a mixed match, particularly when we go further afield than Ireland on that. It does get more and more varied, and from your perspective, you can sit back and relax, because it has very little impact on you as the end user. Just going to go back to Brendan now, just and have a look at the importance of barcodes and GLN within this system.
This slide describes the overall business reason for the GS1 standards. Obviously, we supply identifiers for identifying various objects, and the GTIN is one of those objects which is applied to a product. So we ask suppliers to identify the product, or manufacturers to identify the products that they are producing. The purpose of that is to be able to capture at various points in the supply chain, read that barcode and capture and know what that object is, and be able to use data according to a particular need at a particular point in time. In the case we're talking about now, it's EDI, so we moved on to the share area here, and this is where we're sharing the information that might have been captured at a point of sale process, and that shared information is used for a variety of purposes, be it analytics for the retailer and the manufacturer to analyze their markets, but also to drive the supply chain, and that supply chain driver is used in the EDI messages, and that's what I mean by EANCOM being an EDI message document, electronic document of a commercial document that embeds within it the barcodes that have been scanned at the point of sale, so you can run replenishment. And the use of that is in building a business model that enables you to order products, to get the stocks replenished, and to go through the cycle again. Scanning allows you also allows you to look up and down the supply chain, so you have greater visibility of where your products are. You know what's in your warehouses, you know what's in your back stores, and you can use that information to manage your supply needs. This slide here gives you an overview of the GLNs. A GLN is in fact a 13-digit number, and you see examples of their use here. the first line of this is actually it identifies the sender and receiver of the messages. Now that number is related to a database in which you have the name and address of the company, maybe contact details as well. So you can say, instead of having to put all that information in the message, you can replace it all more accurately by just using the identifier. And bearing in mind, different IT systems and databases store names and addresses in different formats and in different ways, that if you were to try and even share those names and addresses between computer systems, is not very efficient. You will have to have manual intervention to say, oh, that's that company that message comes from. So that doesn't aid a touchless message being communicated from A to B. In terms of the other identifiers, you can see the NID, which actually stands for name and address. IV stands for the invoicee. In other words, that's where the invoice address of that company might be. The next one down is supplier, who's supplied the goods. The next one down is the buyer, who placed the order for the goods. And the next one down is the delivery point. So by using GLNs, you can identify all of the parties in the transaction, maintaining data on your own IT system that's suited for your IT system, but to link to the electronic messaging using the GLN as your index or reference link. So GLNs themselves take an awful lot of inaccuracy out of the supply chain and improves the efficiency, and it enables automated processing of the data. GS1 Ireland is a not-for-profit organisation. We have been working for many, many years in developing standards and solutions. The standards that are available at the moment in the Irish retail market have been developed and evolved by agreement over many, many years. But these standards are not any different from the standards that are deployed in other countries. So what we do here is replicated in other countries. There are over 2 million organizations across the globe who use GS1 standards. They're linked to GS1 organizations in about 110 countries. And we also use the standards to identify other objects, such as the services and also assets.
Okay. Got to the point now where we're just going to look at some of the questions that have came in over the course of the webinar. We've had some submitted here, so I'll just try to attend to those now. So we've had one question in here. Is there a big difference between Irish and UK requirements? No is the answer. I guess Brendan did touch upon it there as well, in that within the UK we do see more of a prevalence towards tradecoms. It's just a legacy thing more than anything else. The messages themselves, you tend to see the same message sets. So order, invoice, credit, by far the most common messages that we see over there. How they're, what syntax they're in or anything has no massive impact on you guys as suppliers. So no, I would say that we tend to see the same message sets, maybe in a slightly different variant. Do the requirements vary more when you go outside of the top 4 retailers? Not at all. We tend to see less and less of the portals being available, just because there is a cost in putting those systems in and then maintaining them. So we tend to see more straightforward traditional EDI used outside of the top 4, but the requirements are the same across the board. So we tend to see the same messages being used, and in fact the messages used in those top 4 are across the board Yancom, Edifact, D96A, and we tend to see that in a lot of other retailers as well. And then the last question that came in there, sorry, second last, there's another one just popped up. How do I get a GLN? Well, to get a GLN, the body responsible for those is GS1, so I would recommend that you contact GS1 direct on that, or alternatively, if you speak with your provider about getting in contact with GS1 and arranging a GLN, I'm sure they'll be able to point you in the correct direction on that one. GS1 do hold the database on these GLNs, so it is important that they are engaged on this. And to make sure that the GLNs are unique and specific to you. Do I need to have a second GLN? This is actually an interesting one, because it does come up from time to time whereby a retailer will request that as well as your main GLN for your business, you do need a secondary one. And actually, Brendan touched upon why you may need this, and it's down to how their systems are configured. So it may be that your first GLN is specific in their systems to one of your account codes, and it may be if you're dealing with their UK or their Northern Ireland entity, that the only way their systems can have a distinction between the two currency codes is to have two GLN. So they may request that you get a second GLN. It's not a huge problem. Again, GS1 will be able to assist you with any help you'll need in acquiring a second GLN.
I should add to a point there on the GLNs is that when you get a GLN from GS1 Ireland, it is registered, and you can a company can actually go up and verify the supplier's identity on a website called www.gapir.org, and that proves that the company knows who they're actually trading with. This GLN identifies the company, so as part of maybe your responsibility to make sure you know where your electronic invoices are being sent to. So that's the reason why we run the GLNs the way we do, is that it's a very well managed service, and it is used by companies in Ireland and network providers to check and see, yeah, this will be an acceptable GLN to be used in this particular environment.
And just, I would like to finalise things and thank everybody for attending today. Thanks, Brendan, for his input today. If you need to contact either party on the back of today's webinar, or if you have any general questions, please do drop us a line. We would love to speak more to you.
Goodbye from me.
Thank you. Goodbye.